Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. My name is Beth Andes, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all today to All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church. And before we start our service, I'd like to particularly welcome any guests that we have among us. So if you are a member and brought a guest, or if you are a guest and feel courageous enough, why don't you stand and tell us your name and where you're from? Excellent.
I'm Christina Burnside, and I'm from Columbus, Ohio. We just moved about a week and a half ago. And this is my son, Noah. He's a senior this year.
Welcome.
Probably don't need to introduce myself. Scoop Gary, I'm a former member, and I'm a frequent guest from Union Church in Springfield, Missouri.
Welcome.
I'm Stevie Combs, my wife Anna, and this is our first time here, and we live over by the airport.
Welcome. And we have a very special guest who's giving our sermon today. He is from Congregation Kol Ami, and he is Reverend Doug Alpert. I also want to welcome all of you who are joining us on live stream. You are very welcome. Amid all the noise in our lives, we take this moment to sit in silence, to give thanks for another day, to give thanks for all those in our lives who have brought us warmth and love, to give thanks for the gift of life. We know we are on our pilgrimage here but a brief moment in time. Let us open ourselves, our lives here on this earth, and forgiving more freely, of understanding more completely.
Hello?
The meaning of our lives.
Hello,
here on
my
this
name
earth.
is Rose,
and
I like
forgiving
this
more
chalice for
freely.
the inherent worth and dignity
Of understanding
every
more
person.
completely.
Hello?
The meaning of our lives.
Hello,
here on
my
this
name
earth.
is Rose,
and
I like
forgiving
this
more
chalice for
freely.
the inherent worth and dignity
Of understanding
every
more
person.
completely.
Hello?
The meaning of our lives.
Hello,
here on
my
this
name
earth.
is Rose,
and
I like
forgiving
this
more
chalice for the
freely.
inherent
Now all please
worth and
rise in
dignity
body of
of
spirit and
every
join with
person.
me in
Hello?
singing song the meaning of our 214. lives.
Hello,
Here on
my
this
name
earth.
is Rose,
Shalom. And
I like
forgiving
this
you
chalice for
freely.
the inherent
Now all please
worth
rise
and
in
dignity
body
of
of spirit and
every
join with
person.
me in
Hello?
singing song the meaning of our 214.
Hello,
Here
my
on
name is Rose,
Shalom. And
I like
forgiving
this
you
chalice for
freely.
the inherent
Now all please rise in
dignity
body
of
of spirit and
every
join with
person.
me in
Hello?
singing song the meaning of our 214.
Hello, my name is Rose,
and
I like
forgiving
this
you
chalice for
freely.
the inherent
Now all please rise in
dignity
body
of
of spirit and
every
join with
person.
me in
Hello?
song the meaning of 214.
Hello, my name is Rose,
and
I like
forgiving
this
you
chalice for
freely.
the
Now
inherent
all please rise in
dignity
body
of
of spirit and
every
join with
person.
me in
Hello?
song the meaning of 214.
Hello, my name is Rose,
and
I like
forgiving
this
you
chalice for
freely.
the
Now
inherent
all please rise in
dignity
body of
of
spirit and And now, please join me in these words of dedication for the offering. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create a just and compassionate society.
Good morning. I am grateful for the opportunity to be back on the pulpit at All Souls. I think it was last year was the last time I was here. And more than that, grateful for the relationship between All Souls and my congregation, Kol Ami. I think we've rented space. I don't feel like a renter, but I guess that's one way to put the relationship, but it feels like so much more. But we've been here for about 5 years now, and we've always been made to feel welcome. We feel like it's home. Grateful for our relationship with Reverend Kendall Gibbons, with Reverend Diana Hughes, for beautiful music and music that would make a rabbi feel right at home. So thank you for that. And grateful for all of you, because it's the culture of All Souls that feels so welcoming and so warm. So I have a bit of a confession to make. When it comes to studying and speaking on sacred texts, and particularly our written Torah, I'm a bit of a contrarian, if not a little ornery. So when one of my congregants tells me about a certain topic in the Torah that this really isn't relevant to the times we live in, it immediately becomes my next topic for study. And so that I've come up with the topic for this morning being a rather bizarre ritual. I did it actually in mind with you guys priding yourselves on being a community of reason and rationality. There is nothing rational about what I'm going to talk about this morning. So with that in mind, a word or two, as they say, about our weekly Torah portion, or what we would refer to as a Devar Torah, or a word of Torah. If you don't know, we divide our 5 books of Moses into weekly portions so as to cover the entirety of the Torah in a single year and then rinse and repeat. In a sense, it forces you to confront whatever is in that week's Torah portion rather than, I like this piece, I don't like this piece. It actually makes you kind of confront the whole thing, for better or for worse. So before we dive in, I wanted to give a little primer on Judaism and Torah and Jewish theology. If this is knowledge you already have or seems repetitious, I apologize, but I kind of want to make sure everybody had a kind of a foundation of where I'm coming from this morning. First of all, Judaism is much more of a behavior-based theology than a faith-based theology. We tell you how to act in exhaustive detail. We don't necessarily tell you how to feel about it. This became particularly true after the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70 of the Common Era, when you have a community in crisis, when their central location for worship has been destroyed, when they've been, many of them, put into exile in Babylonia. God seems absent at that point. So the dilemma was how to bring God back into the people, and the way to do it for the rabbis was to legislate halakha, Jewish law, in exhaustive detail, governing virtually every facet of human existence. Another piece to know, there are 613 commandments, or what we call mitzvot, in the written Torah. They can be classified in a number of different ways. There are positive and negative commandments. For example, honor your father and your mother, positive. Don't kill, don't murder, negative. Sometimes they can be two sides of the same coin. Don't oppress the stranger, the most often stated commandment in the Torah, morphs into, by the time you get into Deuteronomy, to love the stranger. There are commandments that can only be performed in Israel and some that can be performed anywhere. There are gender-specific commandments and, for the purpose of this morning, rational versus non-rational commandments. So it would seem that a theology focused on behavior would be inherently rational, which is true until you dive into the massive body of Jewish ritual behavior that moves well beyond mere everyday life experience. So, for your listening pleasure this morning, I have plucked from our Torah what is arguably the most bizarre of our ritual practices, the ceremony of the red cow, or in Hebrew, para adumah. As luck would have it, the ritual is described in this week's Torah portion. Rabbis like me have thrived on coincidence for as long as rabbis have been in existence. If you're keeping score at home, this is from the book of Numbers, chapter 19, or what we refer to in Hebrew as the book of Bamidbar, which does not translate to Numbers. It translates to being in Bamidbar in the wilderness. The ceremony of the red cow, it was really intended to ritually purify those who become impure by touching a corpse. So the subtext of this ritual is that they were focused on not deifying death. And so it becomes particularly important if you've just been freed from slavery in Egypt, where one of the tasks for the slaves was building pyramids designed specifically to deify the dead. So to this day, in more traditional Jewish communities, the Kohanim, those with the designation of priests, don't go into cemeteries, with the exception being for close relatives other than spouses. The ceremony itself begins with the slaughtering of a red cow. Not just any red cow, but a perfect red cow, one without blemish or defect, who has never worn a yoke or worked in the field. So after it is slaughtered in the presence of a Kohen, a priest, the blood is sprinkled 7 times in front of the tent of meeting or the sanctuary. Then the cow is burned along with cedar wood, hyssop, and crimson wool. Oh, by the way, if you're vegetarian, I apologize profusely at this point. Even if you're not, it gets a little dicey. So the ashes from the cow are mixed with water and sprinkled on the one who has become impure by touching a corpse. This is done on the 3rd day after they acquired the impurity, and then again on the 7th day after they acquired the impurity. And after that 7th day, that person is deemed pure again, and they may re-enter the camp, or really better put, they may become part of the community again. So, of course, the priest and the one who has carried out this process is now considered impure because they touched the dead cow, and they got to go through not the full red cow shtick, but there's a process of purification they go through as well. Did everybody get all that? Exactly. So a couple of side notes on this. A few years ago, it was reported that they actually found one of these perfectly unblemished red cows in Israel. This turned out to be a false alarm. And having not found the red cow for centuries, this particular ceremony hasn't been performed for centuries. I think the best guess is that it had been in the entirety of human existence, it's been performed 9 times. And the other thing to note is that while more traditional synagogues still have a ritual that recognizes a hierarchy where the priest, the Kohen, is at the top of the ladder, that hierarchy in large part has faded to a backdrop with the destruction of the Second Temple and the primacy of what was then referred to as the Pharisees, or what we today know as the rabbis. So as versus the Sadducees, the priest, we won that one, and I'm grateful for that this morning. Although you should also know there is always an eye toward a part of a narrative, particularly in more traditional Jewish communities, to bring back the temple. And in anticipation of that, there is actually a yeshiva in Jerusalem, which is training their students in the sacrificial cult for when the temple will return. So that the thought process exists. Nobody in my community is stepping forward to be trained in sacrificial cult. So our biblical exegetes, our commentators, have come up with some explanations for this ceremony. That touching a corpse is its own sin, and the ritual not only serves as a means of purification, but also a reminder not to commit the sin in the first place of touching the corpse. Another explanation is that it forces us to separate from our loved ones who have died and not to do as other societies do in worshiping the dead or worshiping death. One commentator sees symbolism in the mixture used to burn the cow as meaning not only sin but also pride and humility. Put together, it suggests that not only should we refrain from sin, but also we should seek humility and not allow ourselves to be swallowed by the pride that leads to sin. The 19th century Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch sees the ceremony as symbolic of the need to have mastery over our animal inclinations and to use our free will for good. So by performing the ceremony on this poor animal, we show our mastery over our animal inclinations somehow. And still other commentators see this as an ethical cleansing for both individual and community. All these explanations are well and good, but going back to the time when the Second Temple was destroyed, the great Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, there is no explanation for this ceremony. God says we do it, so we do it. End of story. And actually, this is in a sense a more extreme version of the discussion that surrounds keeping kosher, which, by the way, I do. There are a number of good rational reasons put forth for keeping kosher, keeping the Jewish dietary laws. One is that it's more healthy to have a kosher diet. It's certainly more humane in the way the animal is slaughtered. It's also seen as kind of a middle ground, a way station on the way to becoming vegetarians and eating like they did back in the Garden of Eden. And it kind of gives a nod to our human weakness and our desire to eat animals. But at the end of the day, traditional Jews will tell you that the reason you keep kosher is because God said so. So for any rational person, how can this possibly have relevance to our lives? Jews, by and large, and certainly the congregants at Kol Ami, believe in rational thought. God gave us a brain, and we're not required to check our brain at the door in order to be practicing Jews. So for me, it plays out something like this. There's not much about our relationship with God that is not reflected in interpersonal relationship. We are certainly limited by our human intellect, and so to relate to God, to have any kind of relationship with God, we can do no better than to employ what we know about relationships from our interpersonal relationships. That said, there are times in which our loved ones ask us to do some things for them that don't always make sense to us, and yet we do them anyway, just because they need us to, and they seem to have that need in the moment, and we want to meet the needs of those we love. That is being in relationship. So the ceremony of the red cow, in a sense, becomes a way to connect with God. God seems to need this from us, whether we understand it or not, because if we have a loving relationship with God, we do it anyway. The other piece of all this is that the older I get, the more I'm attracted to non-rational occurrence. You notice I didn't say irrational occurrence, I said non-rational occurrence. So religion for me, if nothing else, is the opportunity to look beyond what is and to imagine what can be. By way of example, in Judaism, the number 8 is the symbolic of this sort of sense of magic. 7 is something we can all understand. It's tangible. We have 7 days in the week. 8 is the magic. 8 is the 8 days of Hanukkah, the miracle of Hanukkah. On the 8th day after you're born, there's the ceremony of circumcision, what we call Brit Milah, circumcision of covenant with God, as a means of consecrating our relationship with God. And both of these things, all this kind of speaks to something that's beyond the world that is. So in an insane world these days, I would argue the non-rational makes all the sense in the world. Which is to say that if I'm delusional, I much prefer my delusions to the reality espoused by many. And with that, my prayer is as follows, that may we all give ourselves the opportunity, the space in our lives to live a life of dreams, a life of imagination, and a life of hope. To always see beyond what is, to see what can be, and as we say in our tradition, Ken Yehi Ratzon, may that be God's will.
Now I'll invite you all to rise as you're able and sing with me song number 392, Hena Matov.
טוב, שבת ההים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, שבת ההים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת ההים גם יחד. הימנה טוב ומה נעים, שבת ההים גם יחד.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, or warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Salam shalom, salam shalom, salam shalom, salam.